thing we often don't think about, our organs in our body. I know I don't think a lot about my kidneys, and they do a lot of work in our bodies and probably deserve more attention than education than we give them. So personally, I'm excited to hear a little bit more about what our kidneys do, how we can keep them healthy. I know there is a lot of interest out there. I've already had some people text me questions to ask at the end, wondering different things. So we're going to let Dr. Donna Michael kind of go through her presentation, and then we'll just have a little bit of Q&A at the end for questions that you guys might have. So yeah, excited to be talking about our kidneys. And Dr. Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself for those who haven't heard from you, a little bit about what you did before you retired and all that good stuff.
Sure. So I was a kidney specialist. I am board certified in nephrology and internal medicine. And over the last several years, developed an increasing interest in plant-based diets and lifestyle choices to become more healthy. And recently, prior to my retirement, I became board certified in lifestyle medicine as well.
Awesome. That's amazing that, I think there's so much you probably don't learn in medical school. And it's just such an integral part of how our bodies operate. Do you think that's going to change in the future? Is it something you kind of have seen?
I certainly hope so. The sad fact is that medical schools only require as little as 4 hours of nutrition education during the course of medical school. And that's often kind of biochemically oriented or science oriented, and it's not really teaching people how to eat well. So there are a number of groups, including the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, that are really advocating to get this sort of education and training in at the medical school level, and then continuing that throughout people's training.
Awesome. Yeah, I really hope it becomes a bigger and bigger part of the medical community, that everybody can kind of be working together to look at everything in these diseases more holistically. That would be amazing. Okay, so we're about 7 past. I'm going to let you go ahead and dive right into your talk tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to be here again, and especially given the opportunity to talk about something that is really near and dear to my heart, which is kidney health. So we're going to dive into why and how to be kind to your kidneys. Perhaps. Oh, there we go. So as we start, I think we should first talk about why the kidneys are actually so important to us. What do they do for us on a day-to-day basis? And I think it's going to be a lot more than people actually realize. So the kidneys actually have many important jobs that they do to maintain our balance and our health. So the first thing that they do is that they clean toxins from the blood. And I think that's the function that most people are most familiar with. They think of the kidneys as kind of the cleaners and the filters in the body. But in addition to that cleaning the toxins function, the kidneys are also important for balancing the water and the chemical balance in our body, so our electrolytes. They kind of keep those within a very fine range that maintains our health. The kidneys also balance the acids in the blood so that our body is at the right pH all the time. So we have all of these sort of balancing and cleaning functions. But beyond that, the kidneys do a number of other things, and I think this is what people aren't often aware of. So first of all, the kidneys affect blood pressure regulation. So that's kind of important because we know that high blood pressure in and of itself is a risk factor for kidney damage. But when kidneys are damaged, they also can cause high blood pressure. And so that can become a bit of a vicious circle. So it's important to know that the kidneys are involved in our blood pressure regulation. The kidneys also have some synthetic functions, so they make things for us that are important to our day-to-day health. So first, the kidneys actually make the most active form of vitamin D. So when we take vitamin D in our diet, it's first converted to kind of an intermediate form in our liver but then it goes to our kidneys, and enzymes in the kidneys convert that vitamin D to its most active form that actually interacts with the vitamin D receptors in our body. And so that's extremely important for bone health. And so that's one of the things that can go haywire when kidney function is low. The other thing that the kidneys make is a substance called EPO, or erythropoietin. And that is a substance that tells our bone marrow, hey, it's time to make more red blood cells. So when the kidneys make the EPO and we make red blood cells, that helps prevent anemia or a low red blood count. And so that's why when kidney function is low, people can sometimes develop anemia because the kidneys aren't making as much of that substance anymore. So in fact, besides the cleaning and the balancing, the kidneys actually affect our blood pressure, and they make some very important substances for our day-to-day health. So now we can see why it's so important that they stay healthy. So what then is chronic kidney disease? So this is a condition that is characterized by a gradual loss of kidney function over time. And when we say chronic kidney disease, we mean that that has been going on for 3 months or longer. So one isolated abnormal lab does not equal chronic kidney disease, or an abnormality that gets better quickly is not chronic kidney disease. But this is kind of a chronic, gradual, progressive worsening of kidney function. Now, the reason why this is so important is that it actually affects a lot of people. It actually affects an estimated 37 million people in the United States. That's about 15% of the population. So about 1 in 7 people is affected by chronic kidney disease. In addition to the people who already have it, 1/3 of adults in the United States are at risk for chronic kidney disease by virtue of other medical conditions that they have. So even though people don't really talk a lot about kidneys and kidney disease, certainly not as much as they talk about heart disease or cancer or some of the more, exotic or mainstream press sorts of things, chronic kidney disease is actually a pretty significant public health condition. And so it's worth talking about and keeping on everybody's radar screen. So what are the risk factors for chronic kidney disease? In the United States, there are really 2 main risk factors that account for the vast majority of chronic kidney disease. And those 2 factors are diabetes and high blood pressure. And unfortunately, those 2 conditions tend to run together an awful lot. And so people may, in fact, be affected by both of those conditions and therefore at even further increased risk for chronic kidney disease. In addition to those well-known factors, there are also a number of other factors that put people at risk for chronic kidney damage. Family history is one. Now, there are certain inherited genetic conditions that lead to chronic kidney disease, so things like polycystic kidney disease are directly inheritable. And so those, if you have a family history of chronic kidney disease, it would be important to keep that in mind for yourself. We know that age, in and of itself, is a risk factor for chronic kidney disease. Studies show that people can lose up to 1% of their kidney function per year as they age after the age of 40. So, and the reason for that is over time, our kidneys are made up of hundreds of thousands of these little filters. And as we age, the little filters kind of scar up. And the more of the little filters that are scarred, the less kidney function we have. So that's why age is a risk factor. We know that obesity is a risk factor. So when we are born with a fixed amount of kidney filters in our kidneys, and also kind of a genetically pre-programmed size that we're supposed to be. And so if our actual size gets to be much larger than what that programmed size was supposed to be, our kidney filters now have to work much, much harder to clean that excess body mass. And it creates a state that we call hyperfiltration. So those kidneys are just really working harder. And that's believed to be a risk factor also for this scarring of the little kidney filters. There are certain medications that put people at risk for chronic kidney damage. And in particular, I would point out medicines called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So those are medicines like Motrin or Advil or Aleve or ibuprofen. And those things, when taken in chronic amounts, can lead to chronic kidney damage. There are also certain demographic groups that, just by virtue of being in that demographic group, we know are at higher risk for chronic kidney disease. So African Americans, for example, and some of that is due to certain gene variants that have been discovered. Also, Hispanics tend to be at higher risk, as well as Native Americans. So all of those things together would constitute our risk factors for chronic kidney disease. When we talk about chronic kidney disease, we talk about it in stages. So it progresses in stages over time. And you'll see here on this table that there are 5 stages of chronic kidney disease. Now I'm going to point out here this level of eGFR. eGFR is your estimated glomerular filtration rate. Well, the easiest way to think about that is that's roughly your percent kidney function. So if you see this word GFR, that's roughly your percent kidney function. So in stage 1 and stage 2, you have either no decline or only mild decline in that percent kidney function, but you have kidney damage. But when you get down to less than 60%, then you're in stage 3, stage 4, and finally stage 5 is what we would consider end-stage kidney failure. So that's when the kidney function is less than 15%, or when a person is on dialysis. And most people don't need dialysis until they get to less than 10%. So the moral of the story there is that we are built with a whole lot of reserve. And that's important because by making interventions and positive changes early on in the course of this, we may be able to prevent ever getting down to that stage 5, okay? Now you'll notice on the last slide that I said in stage 1 and stage 2, when kidney function is relatively preserved, it also requires the presence of kidney damage. And what we mean by that is that there are abnormalities in the blood or the urine or on imaging studies that suggest that there is some chronic damage to the kidneys that we know will be progressive. So right about now, everybody's probably asking, why do I need to know about this? And the reason why it's important for people to know about chronic kidney disease, even before they have it, is early detection can help prevent or slow progression of chronic kidney damage. So the more we know about kidney health before trouble starts, the more likely we are to maintain a healthy kidney. The hardest part about chronic kidney disease, and I would tell you that it was probably one of the hardest parts in my practice, is that most people with early kidney damage have no symptoms whatsoever. And so I would see people in the office who were referred to me and their kidney function was, say, 22%. And they couldn't believe it. How can I possibly have stage 4 kidney disease? I feel fine. I'm still peeing. How can I possibly have chronic kidney disease? But that's the hard part. You don't get symptoms of kidney damage until you're effectively almost in kidney failure and nearing dialysis. And this is why it's important to test for evidence of kidney damage if any risk factors are present. That's why it's important to know your risks. So how do we detect kidney damage? There's really 2 main ways that we do this. We look at a blood test. There is a number in the blood called creatinine. Creatinine is something that all of us have. It's a normal byproduct of muscle metabolism, and the kidneys are responsible for cleaning that out of the blood. So it's a good marker. When creatinine number is going up, it means that kidney function is going down because the kidneys aren't cleaning as well. So we take that creatinine number and we can plug it into a formula that gives us that eGFR number that we talked about. So roughly your percent kidney function. So the blood creatinine number plugs into the formula and gives us our estimated kidney function, which would then help us to determine our stage. The other thing that we can do to detect kidney damage is to look at the urine. So a routine urinalysis, we would check for blood or protein in the urine. And we know that those things don't belong in the urine. And I think that the best way for people to understand this as a marker of kidney damage is think about your kidneys as though you would think about a coffee maker. So if I have my coffee maker, and I put a damaged filter in my coffee maker, I can still make coffee. It might be very delicious coffee, but there are some grounds that come out in the pot that don't belong there. So similarly, when I have damaged filters in my kidney, there are things that come out into the pot in my urine that don't belong there, like blood or protein. So those are our two big ways that we can assess for kidney damage. All right, so now that we've set up the background of, why our kidneys are so important, what they do for us, what's kidney damage, how do we detect it, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how we can prevent kidney damage or slow its progression. And what I like about all of these things is that they are all things that each person has control of themselves. Okay, so there are a lot of things that go on in our lives, medically or otherwise, that we don't have any control over. But these are all factors that we can have a part in our own health. So first, if you have diabetes, you would want to maintain good control of your blood sugar. That's really, really important. We know that the blood sugar damages the filters of the kidneys, and so if you maintain really good control of your blood sugar, you may not ever develop diabetic kidney damage in the first place, or if you already have damage, you may be able to slow its progression. Similarly, when people have high blood pressure, we want them to maintain good control of blood pressure. Now, my definition as a kidney specialist of good blood pressure control is probably a little bit different than maybe other people, patients, or even other doctors. But again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of protecting the kidney health, and we would generally recommend a blood pressure less than 130/80. We also recommend that people would avoid certain over-the-counter medicines, like we talked about earlier, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, Motrin, Advil, Aleve, ibuprofen. And the reason why they are problematic is that they affect blood flow at the level of the kidney filters. And that can be even more problematic when people have to be on certain other prescription medicines for their blood pressure or their heart. We also recommend avoidance of herbal supplements. And the reason for that is that they are generally not tested in people who have chronic kidney damage, and they're certainly unregulated. And there is actually kind of kidney biopsy proven data that there are certain herbal supplements that actually create direct kidney damage. So things like Chinese weight loss herbs, several of the bodybuilding or muscle building substances, things like hydroxycut, creatine. So we want to avoid those sorts of things. The next thing that people can do is stop smoking. And everybody heard about that in the talk last month, that stopping smoking is one of the best things that you can do for your heart. And actually there are about 1,000,004 reasons why people should stop smoking. But I'm going to add one more to that, and that's for your kidney health. We ask people to maintain a healthy weight. So we talked about earlier that obesity is a risk factor for kidney damage. So maintaining a healthy weight is going to be better for the kidney filters. And in addition, maintaining a healthy weight helps you to control the other things that are risks for your kidneys, like your blood sugar and your blood pressure. Similarly, maintaining regular physical activity is important. Not so much because it has a direct effect on the kidneys themselves, but insofar as it helps maintain our weight, our sugar, our blood pressure. And then finally, one of the other things that we can do to help protect our kidneys is to make healthy diet choices. And so we're going to spend the remainder of the talk discussing some of those diet choices that we can make that will actually help protect our kidneys. So the first diet choice that I would talk about is a low sodium diet. So the recommended amount of sodium for someone who is trying to avoid chronic kidney disease or has high blood pressure or has heart disease is generally between 2 and 2.3 grams per day. And there's a little bit of a range because different organizations have slightly different recommendations, but in general, it's going to be in this 2,000 to 2,300 milligram range. We have research that shows that high salt intake is an established risk factor for kidney function decline. And we also know that sodium makes blood pressure more difficult to control. And so that is also going to have an adverse effect on kidney health. Now, one of the most common phrases that I heard in the office whenever I would talk about this is, "But I don't eat that much salt." And so I think it's useful for us to talk just a little bit about dietary sodium intake and kind of where it comes from, because people may be getting a lot more salt than they think. And restaurants in particular are a little bit of a culprit. And I love this cartoon. We have the waiter coming into the kitchen saying, "The patrons at table 5 want to know how you managed to get such a wonderful taste in your salt-free soup." And there, of course, you have the chef adding some salt to the soup. So even when we think that we're eating lower sodium things at a restaurant, it's generally going to be more sodium than if you had prepared that food yourself. So the point that I want to make with salt intake is that most of our dietary sodium does not come from the salt shaker at the table or added salt. And I think that's what a lot of patients would think when I said, "How much salt are you eating?" But really, the salt comes from that which is added during processing and preparation of the foods that we buy. And it's important to keep in mind that both foods from restaurants and packaged processed foods from the grocery can both be culprits in terms of sodium intake. So I always like to do this exercise with my patients when they would come to the office, and I'll give you some common examples. So I would ask people, "Well, what did you have for lunch yesterday?" And so somebody would say, "Well, I was out and about and, it was busy and I was hungry and it was lunchtime, so I had to stop through the drive-thru." So we would sit at the office and I would look up the nutrition facts online, because you can get nutrition facts for just about anybody, any chain restaurant online. And so that McDonald's Big Mac was 1,040 milligrams of sodium and a large fries was 350 milligrams of sodium. So right there in just that one sitting, you have more than half of your whole daily allowance of sodium. And that's if you ate nothing else at the lunch. Or for example, a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich, 1,350 milligrams of sodium in one sandwich. You think, okay, well, I'm going to take the family out to Olive Garden for dinner, and I'm just going to have breadstick and salad. Well, if you eat one breadstick and one serving of salad, that's 1,200 milligrams of sodium right there. Again, more than half of your daily intake. And I don't honestly know anybody that eats just one breadstick at Olive Garden. And if in fact you add any of the entrees onto that, you can be well in excess of your whole daily amount of sodium. And then my very favorite one that I ever looked up for a patient, and so I had to share it, is the Texas Roadhouse Bloomin' Onion. And if you eat 1/4 of an order, it's 1,261 milligrams of sodium. Or if you ate the whole thing yourself, over 5,000 milligrams of sodium. So there you've got 2 to 2.5 days worth of sodium in one appetizer, and then you haven't even gotten to the rest of the meal or the rest of your day. So important to keep in mind. I also don't want you to forget about packaged and processed foods purchased at the grocery store. And that's why, as was discussed in last month's talk, it's very important to look at nutrition labels on packages. All of the nutrition labels have sodium intake listed on the package. So look at it. but also make sure that you look at how many servings there are. So you may have a can of soup and it has 400 milligrams per serving, but then you eat the whole can and it was actually 2 or 2.5 servings. So you actually then have 800 or 1,000 milligrams of sodium in one sitting. So just try to keep those numbers in mind. And again, like I mentioned before, it's very easy, particularly for chain restaurants, to look up nutrition facts online. And many restaurants will also have printed copies, if you're unable to access the data online, printed copies at the restaurant available for you. So is there any good news about all of this? Well, of course, or I wouldn't have talked about it. What we do know is that low sodium diets are effective for both improving blood pressure and also in that effect happening very quickly. So there was a study in patients with chronic kidney damage, and they looked at restricting sodium intake to that 2.3 grams a day for just a 7-day period. And at the end of the 7 days, the participants in that study who were following the low sodium diet had a drop in their systolic blood pressure, that's the top number, of 11 points, and of their diastolic pressure of more than 9 points, that's the bottom number. And that was quite a bit better than the people who, the control group, that were told to just eat, their regular amount. So that is huge, because if you look at that change in blood pressure, that is as good as, if not better, than many of the prescription medications that are available. So think about that. If you work to improve the sodium intake in your diet, you may need less medicine than you did before, or perhaps no medicine, depending on the condition. So I think that's a great thing to know. Besides the blood pressure effect, they also found, because again, this was in patients with chronic kidney damage, people eating a low sodium diet also had less protein coming out in their urine. And that actually was a marker of improvement in kidney damage. So low sodium diets are effective. Now let's shift gears to plant-based diets. And that's something, if you've heard me speak before, is also a topic near and dear to my heart. And so we're going to talk about some of the literature that's available on plant-based diets. Before we dive into that, I just want to be clear in what I mean by plant-based diet. What I'm talking about is a whole food plant-based dietary pattern. And what this means is that we are excluding animal products and excluding highly processed and refined foods. And what we're doing with this diet is focusing on fiber-filled foods that are naturally rich in vitamins and minerals. They're lower in calorie density, and they are lower in overall protein, though provide sufficient protein for our health. So how might these diets be helpful? I put this slide here, and it's really quite busy, and I don't want you to necessarily attend to each of the details. But this was a paper that was just published this year that looked at the sum total of recent literature about plant-based diets in kidney disease. And as you can see, what they show is there were a number of cited beneficial effects of whole food plant-based diets. So we know that these diets increase fiber, and that leads to a host of beneficial effects. These diets are low in lipids. That leads to beneficial effects. The diets are low in protein and are only plant proteins, not animal proteins. That leads to a list of beneficial effects. And then in addition to the kidney benefits, you also have a number of general health benefits that occur and have been cited with whole food plant-based diets. So as you can see, there's an emerging body of evidence over recent years from numerous studies that these plant-based diets can prevent development and slow progression of chronic kidney disease. And I would tell you, during the last few years of my practice, when I became more interested in this and began incorporating it more into my practice, there was a point where it seemed like there was nearly a paper a month being published about the benefits in terms of kidney effects. So we're not going to go through all of that because it would be way too much, but we're going to focus on some of the most important ones. So first, there was a prospective study, which means that they saw people at time 0 and then followed them forward a period of time. And they found that there was a 12% decreased risk of developing decreased kidney function when eating a plant-based diet compared to a meat-based diet. So that's pretty good, 12% risk reduction. There was another large study that was over 14,000 people, and they followed them for over 20 years. And what they did in this study was they looked at people's different dietary patterns, and they compared some different plant-based indices. So they would make a scoring system based on what people were reporting that they ate, and then place them into these different categories. So people who were in the highest quintile, meaning they had the highest score and were most closely following a healthy plant-based diet, those folks had an overall 14% decreased risk of developing chronic kidney disease. So again, fairly similar to the previous study. Interestingly, if people were normal weight at baseline rather than being overweight at the start, there was an even bigger benefit with a 25% decreased risk in developing kidney disease. And so what these researchers found was that higher consumption of healthy plant foods was associated with a lower risk of developing chronic kidney disease and a slower decline in kidney function. Now, you might wonder why I've put the word healthy in bold, and I keep talking about these healthy plant-based foods. So this is where it gets interesting, because as it turns out, the type of plant-based diet really matters. So if you look here at my screen, I've got an Impossible Burger with vegan mayo and vegan cheese. And I've got potato chips, and I've got a regular soda, and I've got Oreos. Now, technically, if I ate that for my lunch, that's a plant-based meal. But is that a healthy plant-based meal? Absolutely not. And so that's what we need to get our heads wrapped around. And it's not just eating plant-based, but really eating the whole healthy, unprocessed foods that's best for us. So in this particular study, they actually looked at people who were eating less healthy plant-based diets, and people who were most closely following a less healthy plant-based diet, they actually had an 11% higher risk of developing chronic kidney disease than the people who were eating the healthy plant-based diet. And so the thing to point out here is that when you replace healthy plant foods with juices, refined grains, processed foods, refined sweets, all of those things, you can actually negate the benefit of eating plant-based. And the interesting part is that this same effect has actually been shown in studies of both type 2 diabetes and coronary artery disease, heart artery disease as well. So the type of plant-based diet that you eat is very important. Now, what about red or processed meat? There's actually a fair bit of data about that. I'll share with you one study in 2017 actually showed a 23% increased risk of incident chronic kidney disease. That means the new development of chronic kidney disease when people had a higher red or processed meat intake. Interestingly, and this is why I think this study was important, is that this study also showed, though, a 17% decreased risk in developing kidney disease if you ate legumes, or a 19% decreased risk if you were eating nuts. So plant-based proteins seem to decrease risk of chronic kidney disease, whereas red and processed meat seem to increase it. So why does that happen? As it turns out, the type of protein, your protein source, might be more important than the actual quantity of protein that you're getting. And so we find that different proteins have different effects on the kidneys. And when we study individuals, we find that animal protein tends to put more strain on the kidneys than plant protein. So remember we talked about before when those kidneys are hyperfiltering or overworking, we find that that occurs when people are fed animal proteins, but does not tend to occur when people are fed plant proteins. One of our other benefits of plant-based diets are that they're high in fiber. And again, if you've heard some of my previous talks, you know that fiber is great for people. You know, it's great for our intestinal mobility, it's great for our bowel health, it's great for our gut bacteria. There's data in kidney disease that it might reduce the amount of toxins that are made that make people sick as they get to lower levels of kidney function. But in fact, fiber in and of itself reduces your risk for ever developing kidney disease in the first place. So in one study, there was a 50% decreased risk when you compared the people with the highest fiber intake versus the lowest fiber intake. We also know that if you already have chronic kidney disease, higher fiber decreases all-cause mortality, meaning death from any cause. It lowers markers of inflammation, and it actually results in better preservation of the kidney function over time. And so the moral of the story when it comes to fiber and kidneys is eat your fiber. All right, next topic, how about our acid balance? Well, we talked about earlier that the kidneys have a role in balancing the acids in the bloodstream. And we know that as kidney function declines, we are less able to manage that acid balance. And that particularly becomes a problem when kidney function gets to less than 30%. We know that acid production primarily comes from the breakdown of protein, okay? So there is a number in our blood called bicarbonate. It's the buffer in our blood for the acids. And when our kidneys are no longer balancing the acids correctly, that number goes down. And we know that that can be treated with medication. Could it be treated another way? Well, in fact, it can also be treated with fruits and vegetables. So we know that fruits and vegetables have a tendency to alkalinize, meaning correct the acid balance in the blood. So this particular group did a 1-year study in stage 4 kidney disease patients. So people whose kidney function was between 15 and 29%. And they compared the pills, which are basically the equivalent of baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, versus fruits and vegetables that were prescribed to people in an amount that was felt to manage their acid based on their weight. And at the end of that 1 year, what they found was that both groups had improvement in acid levels and decreases in markers of kidney damage. So that's great. I mean, you have, you know, improvement in the bicarbonate number, regardless of the group, and then you also have decreases in your marker of kidney damage in the urine. But what was interesting is that the fruits and vegetable group also had a decrease in their weight and a decrease in their blood pressure. And that did not happen in the pill group. But that makes sense because when people eat more fruits and vegetables, they're getting more fiber, more nutrients, they're low calorie density. So we can eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, but not have a lot of calories. So that would explain the decrease in weight. And then the decrease in blood pressure, we talked about before. Plant-based diets can be beneficial for blood pressure as well. The pill group, not so much. So it's interesting, the fruits and vegetables were effective with treating the problem, but they actually had beneficial side effects, as opposed to, say, perhaps some of the pills. Now, I'm going to mention a word about sodas, simply because it came up an awful lot when I was in the office, because a lot of people like a lot of soda. So what we found is that both sugar-sweetened and diet sodas have been associated with an increased risk of developing kidney disease. So the Nurses' Health Study, very large study of women over a prolonged period of years. In that particular study, for women who were drinking 2 or more servings of artificially sweetened soda per day, they had a 102% increased risk of having a more than 30% decline in kidney function. So that's pretty big. There was also another large observational study. This study primarily started looking at people for atherosclerotic risk, but then they started looking at other factors, including kidney issues. And in that particular study, diet soda of more than 7 glasses per week, so 1 glass a day, versus 1 glass a week, you had an 83% higher risk of developing end-stage kidney disease. That means dialysis. So not so sure when people say, but I love soda. But how can you love soda more than you love your kidney health? Something to keep in mind. And then more recently, there was a publication about sugared sodas that showed regular consumption of sugary soda can increase kidney disease risk by 60% because of the effects that it has on reducing kidney blood flow because of the high fructose corn syrup. So if I'm going to have one word about sodas, I guess the word would be no. Okay, now I also like to bring up, people ask, well, are there any concerns about eating a plant-based diet in chronic kidney disease? Because quite frankly, the conventional teaching was that these were not good diets for people with chronic kidney disease. When I was a fellow, no one would have talked about plant-based diets in chronic kidney disease, 26 years ago. But in fact, the recent data suggests that it's safe and healthy. So people ask, can you get enough protein? And the answer to that is unequivocally yes. The standard American diet, generally people are overfeeding protein, way more than people need for their nutritional needs. And when people have chronic kidney damage already established, as their kidney function declines, you would actually eat less protein. So can you get enough protein? Absolutely. The next question that people ask is whether it's the right kind of protein. And this comes from, kind of some old terminology where people felt that kidney disease patients needed to eat high biological value protein, which they equated to animal protein. But in fact, plant proteins contain everything, all of the amino acids that a person needs that you could get in plant proteins. So the most recent editorial that came out about this just this year is that plant-based proteins are in fact sufficient in meeting both quantity and quality requirements, okay? Now, I always like to mention vitamin B12 when people are eating plant-based diets because vitamin B12 is a concern for deficiency. If you are eating a whole food plant-based diet, you should be taking a vitamin B12 supplement. That would be very important. There just simply aren't enough plant-based foods for you to get sufficient vitamin B12. Now, I mentioned vitamin D, not necessarily because there's a concern about plant-based diets, but just chronic kidney disease in general. That population of patients tends to have a higher prevalence of vitamin D deficiency than even the general population. And we know that vitamin D deficiency is fairly common. So I would recommend that you have your vitamin D level tested. And if you are deficient, that you should be taking a vitamin D supplement as well. Now, what about potassium? Potassium often comes up when we talk about chronic kidney disease because you can develop elevated potassium levels. And that happens as kidney function declines, but doesn't really become a particular issue until we get to less than 30% kidney function. So we know for people with chronic kidney disease at lower levels of kidney function, the recommended amount is 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams daily. Now, I would tell you that there have been no studies that have shown any differences in blood potassium level when you compare a plant-derived potassium source with an animal-derived potassium source. So we don't think that people absorb plant-based potassiums to a greater extent than animal-based. We do know that food preparation techniques can make a significant difference in the amount of potassium that you get in your foods. So potatoes, for example, when people with chronic kidney disease and low levels of kidney function want to eat potatoes, we recommend that they soak their potatoes for a couple hours, drain that water off, rinse them, and then cook from there. And similarly, you can do the same thing with beans and legumes and some of the other high potassium foods. But the most recent literature suggests that there are not significant issues. I would simply recommend that you use caution because many people take medicines that can also affect potassium level. So you're going to want to have a discussion with your own doctor and monitor your potassium levels from time to time. Now, as you saw on that one very busy slide earlier, there are a number of benefits of plant-based diets beyond the kidneys, but I'm going to mention them insofar as they can affect the kidneys. So we know that plant-based diets are effective in improving type 2 diabetes. We know that plant-based diets can improve high blood pressure. We know that plant-based diets can improve high cholesterol. We know that plant-based diets reduce risk of cardiovascular disease. We know that plant-based diets are beneficial in terms of weight loss. So the point that I want to make to you is that you do not need a separate diet for your diabetes, a separate diet for your blood pressure, a separate diet for your heart disease. One diet works for all of these conditions. One lifestyle, one way of eating can keep the whole person healthy. So the bottom line for what we can do in terms of diet choices and our kidney health is we want you to eat more vegetables and fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds. We want you to eat less sodium, animal protein, particularly red and processed meat, refined grains, processed foods, sugar-sweetened beverages and foods, and sodas. So the message that I want to leave you with is a message of hope. Chronic kidney disease doesn't just happen overnight. It happens very slowly. It happens in stages. And I want all of you to know that you can have a significant impact in your kidney health by simply making changes in your diet and your lifestyle. It's very, very important that you know your numbers. Ask your doctor, what's my creatinine? What's my GFR? What stage of kidney disease am I in? What's my blood pressure? What's my A1C? Know these numbers and keep track of them. Because the bottom line is that you want to learn all you can and do all you can to stay healthy. And that's really the best way to show your kidneys some love. And with that, I will ask if there are any questions.
Awesome. I love that. Will you actually get me a list of those things that we should ask our doctor to be looking at? And we'll
Yes.
put those along with your presentation on the church website, because I do think a lot of people forget when they get to the doctor, like, what should I be asking? What are the different pieces that I should make sure I'm looking at? Because many times I've had blood work done and didn't think till after it was over, oh, I wanted them to test my vitamin D or something else. And they're like, oh, it's too late, right? Then you got to re-get it drawn. So I think that would be really helpful. I know you mentioned non-steroidals. I'm always concerned about things like Advil.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Is Motrin versus Advil versus Tylenol better? I mean, I know none of them are great to the extent we can keep them out of, you know, our mouths, but can you give us any sense of that?
Sure. So in terms of kidney health, if you have to take a pain reliever, Tylenol is a better option. There is no difference whatsoever between Motrin, Advil, Aleve, the prescription non-steroidals, even some of the newer ones. All of those are going to have the same adverse effects on on blood flow at the level of the kidney filters. So, I've had patients say, well, but once a month I have a terrible migraine, and the only thing that I can do to abort it is to take an Advil or two. So, that is probably not as big of an issue as the person who takes, 1 or 2 Advil or takes an Advil PM every evening. But that being said, if you happen to take those couple Advil on a day that you're a little dehydrated and you're also on other medications that are commonly used for blood pressure and heart disease, it can pretty quickly get into a problem. So the best recommendation for people with established kidney disease is that they should avoid the non-steroidals completely. And as we talked about in one of the earlier talks, I will also throw into that mix turmeric supplements. Because the turmeric supplements that you get at Costco or at some of the other stores are of a milligram dose that if you took that regularly, it actually has the same effects. And I think, and you may recall that I had mentioned this in an earlier talk, we actually, my partners and I had seen several cases of acute kidney failure due to turmeric ingestion.
So you say just use it in the original form, not in the capsules.
If you're going to take turmeric, I wouldn't take it as a capsule for anti-inflammatory effects, because that's basically what you're getting, anti-inflammatory effect dose. Turmeric eaten daily or periodically by adding, a half teaspoon to your food is fantastic. We know that there are a lot of antioxidant and reducing oxidative stress sort of properties to herbs such as turmeric. But again, those things are best taken in their whole food form.
Awesome. And we do have another question in the chat. You covered a lot about the different foods. What about water? How critical is that with the kidneys?
So this is interesting. There is this notion that people have to drink 8-ounce glasses of water daily. There's also a notion that if I drink more water, somehow my kidneys will be better. But in fact, that is not the case. Drinking excess fluid does not make our kidneys function or clean the toxins out of the blood any better. Now, that being said, we want to avoid dehydration, but people's daily fluid intake is going to vary based on, their level of activity, whether they're working outside in the heat, whether they're sedentary in an air-conditioned home. That is going to vary from person to person. The only time that we recommend high fluid intake, where we would intentionally have you drink excess water, are really 2 circumstances. One would be kidney stones, because people with kidney stones, if you drink a certain amount of liquid, you can actually reduce your risk of recurrence. And then the second case is actually polycystic kidney disease, one of the genetic kidney diseases that has been shown to possibly be effective in slowing progression of cyst formation.
Awesome. And another question we have in the chat is, can kidney disease be reversed, or can you only improve it? Have you seen it actually reverse from the stage perspective?
So that's a tough question. There is some limited evidence that if people, are losing weight and getting healthier and having better control of their factors, that there may be some improvement in their creatinine number. Now, most people are not going to stay at the exact same number every single time. And this was something that I tried to communicate to my patients at the office. Your kidney function is going to vary within a range. So you will have a baseline range of your creatinine number. So it's not going to be the exact same number every single time. So if this time it's 1.5, but last time it was 1.6, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's getting magically better and it's going to continue to go back to normal. Because if you think about it, even lab tests, there's going to be a little bit of variation. If you run the same blood sample twice, you may have a slight variation in those numbers. That being said, when people have significant weight loss, because creatinine is a weight-based generation in our bodies. So some people it will appear that they have improvement in their creatinine number, and thereby their GFR or kidney function goes up. So it's hard to know whether that means that they have physiologically reversed the effects in their kidneys. That would actually take kidney biopsy data to know with certainty. But I would take a slight improvement in creatinine over a slight worsening in creatinine any day. So chronic kidney damage isn't as reversible as, say, acute kidney injury, where you can have an acute insult to the kidneys, have much worse kidney function. That insult recovers and you can return back to your normal kidney function. So chronic kidney damage is just a little bit of a different animal.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned with just signs that you can see maybe in your urine. You mentioned blood in the urine is obviously a sign for us, and you said proteins. Is
So
that
you
something
don't see that at all.
Okay, that's just
And
something you're
even,
testing.
yes, and even the blood in the urine that we're looking at
can't
in
always
terms of
see.
kidney damage, it is microscopic. If there's visible blood in the urine, that is much more commonly a plumbing problem, and you should be seeing the urologist first. Yep.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think that covers most of our questions for tonight, and we're right at 8 o'clock. So this has been recorded. I did put in the chat room, if you guys want to click that link, that is our church website with the Dining with the Doctors link. So that's where we're going to have all the recordings. We're going to put the tests that Donna was telling us we should have our doctors give us if we're in and wondering about some of these levels that she discussed today. And it's also the place where you can get text messages. So I'll make sure we have, we have a group where we text you every time we have a meeting coming up. We're probably going to skip a couple months in the summer here because people are really busy and move into September. But I want to have a way to reach out to you guys to know when our next session is. So please sign up for the texting service. All you have to do is text yes to a phone number, Dining with the Doctor, and you'll go ahead and get regular text messages every time we have a meeting. So please check out the link in the chat room. I hope you guys have an awesome weekend. We can all love our kidneys by just, again, eating a really healthy diet and making sure we're checking our levels on a regular basis so we don't eventually go in to see a doctor like Dr. Michael and get surprised that we're in kidney failure or close to kidney failure. That's what these meetings are all about, trying to get the preventative information out there so we can all stay healthy and live longer. Thank you so much. And here's Donna's information on the screen. You can follow her Facebook. I love her email, onlyplantshere@gmail.com. So if you've got questions, please feel free to reach out.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in a few months.
Thank you.
Bye.